I had the opportunity to spend some time with a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, on Friday evening. And you know how conversations can go all over the place. And out of the blue, she said, when has our society lost its ability to show care and consideration for one another? And she went on to tell me a story that fits so perfectly with where we've been, where we are. Driving down her street, she's following an SUV. Yes, it's a driving story. When without putting on a blinker or anything, the SUV decides to do a U-turn. Now this is a residential street, right, in Denver, not planned for the size of our cars and whatnot. There's no way you can do a U-turn in a simple turn on this street. So this car begins, this kind of a thing. And she has gotten her car stopped just fine, and not with she said, I didn't have a whole lot of distance between me and him, but plenty of room for him and she could see after a while it was a him. And as he was continuing to make this move, to get himself turned around, he rolled down his window and he motioned for her to roll down her window. And she thought, well, this will be nice. He'll admit he maybe didn't see me right behind him, or thank me for being patient while he goes through this process. But much to her surprise, the guy said, "Get the F out of my way." Challenging sometimes, right? And, she thought, am I in the middle of the road or something? She looked over, she goes, I probably had 8 to 12 inches between me and the car that was parked next to me. I was clearly on my side. So we get to see that it's challenging sometimes to offer a blessing. But that's exactly what we're working with, to find the love in the space between us, right? We're working with Pierre Pradovan's book, The Gentle Art of Blessing. And while it may seem gentle, it's not being very gentle on me. Somebody came through the line after the first service and said, this thing has taken me right to my core issues, I think, which is beautiful about it, right? But we're getting to see that while it can be easy to bless people while we're relaxed, while we're not the focus of some kind of attack, that it can be much more challenging. And that's where Pradovan is saying it's important to practice, to let it be a spiritual practice, because it has great impact on our lives and on the lives of others. So after I gave my first talk on this subject, Colleen Jane came up to me and said, I think you should know about Roberta Billingsley's blessing. Now, Roberta, she just told me, the first service I had to admit, I have no idea who Roberta Billingsley is, but Roberta was a longtime member of Unity of Boulder. She's passed now, very active in that community. And this was the blessing that she often offered. God bless you and wake you up. And when I first started reading Pierre's book, he said, just offer whatever blessing comes to mind. But as I've gotten more comfortable with it, I do find that my blessings tend to be more to the point. Like I might, and actually as she was sharing the story, even though I had no idea who this guy was, I found myself blessing his awareness of his heart and his continual movement towards coming to understand who he is as a spiritual being born in love. So we continue the journey today. And remember, if you're not reading along with us, Pierre has done a pretty powerful job so far of pointing out the underlying spiritual laws that we're aligning with when we offer a blessing, and why we have the opportunity then for our lives to move into a rich, peaceful experience, or to really take off in the potentials. And he's continuing that today by talking to us of the law of harmony. And here's what he says. The fundamental law of harmony governs all beings in order to guide and adjust all things for our good. It governs all beings in order to guide and adjust all things for our good. In the Bible, it says in Romans, all things work together for good for those that love God. And as I was reflecting on that this week, I thought, okay, we don't name a law in unity, the law of harmony, but I wonder if the closest thing would be divine order. We say that all things are in divine order, that there is no exception, and that with that order, all things are working for good. That is a unity saying. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, does it, that all things are good. We're saying that all things are working for good. And notice, too, in the scripture that it says, for those that love God. So I was curious, well, if you don't love God, then is your life full of misery and horrible things happening? And so I went to the commentaries. The commentaries are, you can find a variety of commentaries on the Bible, and they're written by people who come from different traditions. I must have stumbled on someone who more aligns with the way we look at life, because they said it's not so much a literal loving of God, but that phrase back then would be for those that trust that there's a higher power at play in your life. And just put yourself in a moment for someone who doesn't trust that. You're immediately then a separate being. If there's no higher power at play in your life, you are separate. And as separate then, life feels like it's being done to you. You are not part of something greater. There is not something greater at play that is moving all of society along. Life is instead happening to you. And beautifully, I really enjoyed this. Whoever wrote this commentary said it's easy then to play the role of victim. And from a victim mentality, we miss out on the potential. We're caught, poor me. And we go into trying to control life instead of stepping out in new ways, instead of exploring that which is happening to us in our life right now as a doorway to greater understanding, greater freedom. So when we say all things are working for good, as I said, we're not saying that everything that happens in our life is good. We're saying that it offers us the opportunity to see whether we're stuck somewhere. And you can think of horrific things that can happen to people. One of the things that occurred to me would be the death of a partner or the death of your child. Those are difficult things to go through. But there's a difference between mourning something like that and collapsing into something like that. In feeling assured that your life will not go on, that you cannot survive without this person. Just take me now, God. Do you see? That is not spirit in you. Spirit in us is always moving to greater and greater expression, which usually brings more and more light, more and more creativity, that we are never done until we're done. Never done until we're done. We face challenge in life, don't we? And yet we learn to work with it the best we can. It's challenging to even hear that, right? Sometimes it's like, okay. Good thing I have notes. So, one of the things that Pierre points out is that the universe beautifully is reflecting what we believe either consciously or unconsciously. And that when we're willing to be in a state of blessing, in a state of expanded love, of gratitude for what's going on in life, it's easier to see those things. And he uses a very simple example, but this is exactly how it works. When he was a little kid, he was prone to sinus infection. And one day while he was at the doctor simply said to him, as long as you walk around without proper protection, head protection in the rain, a Wayne slicker or something, you're going to get a sinus infection. And that guy took it in. They just took it in. So every time he went out in the rain, got caught in the rain without a proper head protection, he got a sinus infection. Until he stumbled into a more new thought perspective. And when he found out that they cannot medically attribute walking in the rain to a sinus infection, to a cold, there's no tie whatsoever that they can find, he suddenly had the understanding, oh, I took what that guy told me at hook, line, and sinker. And he said, I never got a sinus infection again from walking in the rain without proper head protection. This is the way that it works. And what's interesting is if we're so impacted by the things that we've taken on as a child, certainly we want to explore those. That's right. The journey is about exploration. But also, what the heck? Why not shower our consciousness with blessing as much as we can? Just let it rain through us. By offering blessing, we're really continuing to condition our consciousness with love, with expansion, with delight, with gratitude. It can't hurt. Can't hurt at all. So one of the things then that this takes, if you're really going to step into every experience in your life, okay, Scott says this is a blessing, the Bible says it's a blessing, okay, I'm going to open up to it. It takes a great deal of faith because we're really asking you to step into the unknown when something happens in our life that we feel out of control for. You may remember that faith is not a quality of spirit. So often I'm talking to you, hey, this is a quality of spirit. Just relax, it'll come up with you. No, faith is something we have to develop like a muscle in our body. It's our humanness that needs to have faith. Spirit is totally trusting of life. Spirit says, bring it on. I just want to see what can happen through this location. It doesn't care if we fail. No judgment in spirit. It's like, oh, that was cool. Now let's see what we can do. But in our humanness, we tend to contract, we tend to pull back, we go into that separate place. And so it takes a lot of faith to continue to lean into our life. And the greatest way, the easiest way to develop faith is to go back and do a review of your history. Because there have been, for every one of us, situations where we went, how on earth will I get through this? How can I survive this? And yet, we do. You wouldn't be sitting here if you didn't survive it. And so as we begin to lock into that reality, then we can bring reality check to this moment. When your ego comes up and says, you're a goner now, or no, you can't follow that guidance, you can't leave that job, you need that income. I don't know what that voice was thinking inside of you, but let me reality check you this way. No. You can say, yeah, I hear you. I know you're coming from a place of fear, but this feels true to me, this guidance that says it's time to move on. And in that, then we step out to claim our good. Often when we're willing to do that historical review, we also see that the very things in our life that were painful, that were challenging to us, have come forth as a blessing to us. Pradavan again tells, I thought, a really powerful story of a young man, an older man, but when he was young, he grew up in a very restrictive religious family where, he says it was never spoken overtly, you couldn't help but come to the understanding that any kind of sexual activity or sexual energy in you was sinful. And so when he reached that age, and you know how do you remember how powerful those energies were? Some of us, those have sailed. For some of the rest of you, you're right in the middle of that. But they're so powerful, and he was convinced that he had to rein that in order to be in good stead with God. And so he put himself through hell, really. He took cold baths. He slept on the cold, hard floor. Anything to try and dampen down this energy that was in him, this life-giving energy, right? And it says that as a result of it, and I don't even know exactly what this means, but he developed an array of psychosomatic disorders. However, at some point in his life, he stepped out of that tradition. And he came to realize that for most of the world, it was a natural expression. And he was able to do his work, and he was able to work through those issues. And he talked about how he came to find a very satisfying and peaceful life. Then down the road, here's the blessing. He's a school teacher. And I don't know where he was teaching, but he pointed out that he was asked to teach sex education to a group of Muslim high school kids. And what he found out was their culture was putting them through the same thing that his family put him through. And because he could relate, right? Because he himself had been there, he was able to tailor that education for those kids in a way that helped them to free up. He could just sit and listen to them. He could really be the light. Be the light. And how many of us are either in careers, or we see it in the way we deal with our friends or whatnot, how we have taken the very darkness that we were raised with, and different degrees of darkness, right? But because we have compassion, because we've been willing to do our work, we can show up in ways that bless the world and bring forward movement. Look at the movement that's happened in our lifetimes, you guys. It's amazing. Through people willing to not be stuck, but to continue in their forward movement. Truly a blessing that requires our faith, our willingness to step out of what we know and align with what is instead true. So Mary Becky, I love this quote. Thank goodness it's right here so I can see it. So he brings us to the book of Joel, which says, I will restore to you the years the locust has eaten. For years, I wondered, what the heck does that mean? But Pradavan puts it this way, that when we're willing, like this gentleman who had this challenging experience with his family's orientation, their perspective on life-giving sexual energy, when he went back and worked through it, he had an opportunity to work through any kind of resentments, any kind of pain, and it becomes an event, but almost a non-issue. And some of those are my words that, I tend to get up here and I share with you different stories of things that happen in my life, but the reality is, today, most of them are a non-issue. But they are an experience that I can help orient you towards what it means to work with our pain. And people are shocked that I have a wonderful relationship with my parents now. Part of that is I did the work so that we regain, we reclaim the years of the locust, the years that seem to be robbed from us by these different things, because we get to reclaim today. We no longer are walking around feeling we need to cover our head or we're going to get some kind of sinus infection. We become freer and freer, more opportunity then to claim the blessing, to open to the possibility. So I will restore to you the years that the locusts have eaten. Right now. I will loosen you from the binding of the past. And then Mary Baker Eddy. You may know that name, you may not. For those of us that study unity, Mary Baker Eddy was one of the founders of the New Thought movement. She went on to form Christian Science, a little rigider than unity, quite a bit more rigid than unity. If you really like unity, you're probably not going to be a great Christian Scientist. But Mary Baker Eddy was one of the people that the Fillmores went to for their early training. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, the founders of unity. Here's what she says. Tireless being, patient of man's procrastination, affords him fresh opportunities every hour. In other words, when we're in those times where we're just sure that nothing's working, if we can open, if we're in that blessing place, which naturally brings us to a place of expansion, of gratitude, of love, we're opening ourselves up to the fact that the universe is always interested in guiding us to possibilities. Oh, it may not be in our time frame. Often I have to put a talk down with some assurance that the next morning it'll be clearer to me. Have you ever had that experience? We have to trust it. This is the stepping out in faith, not grind down on everything in our lives. Give it some space. But the universe is always wanting to work with us. And Pradavan shares a story that I have a little bit of relationship. He talks about a drought that hit Senegal. And I happened to have gotten to visit Senegal before this drought happened. It was really and these are, this is in Africa. It's not the kind of place like the United States. But even though it was a poor country, they were the breadbasket of Africa. And then this drought hits. And in the drought, what they find out is they had overtaxed their soil. And so, if you don't have rich soil anymore and then a drought hits, you're kind of in trouble. It's really hard to get any kind of crop to grow. And interestingly enough, this group of farmers led by one peasant farmer decided to explore the possibilities. And I want you to hear the approach they took. They came together. They started every meeting in prayer. In prayer. It's interesting. We try to start every meeting in unity in prayer. Why? Because it opens us. It orients us towards the potential. Now, I was just at a memorial yesterday where I got to be reminded that not all prayer is particularly opening. It was rough being there. I wanted to jump up and say, let's rephrase that. This guy is not going to hell. I can assure you. But for us, we pray in affirmative ways. We're always affirming potential in our prayer. And then they refused to let themselves go into victim mode. It was one of the rules of the meeting. You couldn't blame the government, you couldn't blame the economy, you couldn't blame the weather for the situation is. Instead, they focused on questions. How is it that we got ourselves here? Notice how they're taking responsibility. And what can we do to change this experience? And then they ended every meeting by letting people talk about the blessings they were experiencing as they made change. You see, Mary Baker Eddy is right. When we can get into an open place, when we can relax into the situations, Spirit just needs a little bit of space, but space comes with relaxation. Notice that. If we can just take a breath and relax a little bit, open ourselves to the fact that the universe is loving and supporting us, then we have an opportunity to continue to gain these rich blessings. One of the things that stood out to me, he got the opportunity to interview one of these farmers, and the farmer says, trials push us to innovate. The trials in our life push us to innovate. Can you imagine if the universe was set to just give you everything that you wanted? What would be our incentive to change anything? How would we be more forward growing? How would we be coming to greater and greater expression? It is the very openness to the trials and to trust that the very guidance we need in the form of potential is ours. So here we are. We've been looking a lot at different truths, spiritual truths, but this one really lands directly on us, doesn't it? This is really coming to bless the unfolding of your life, the law of harmony, divine order, that you are loved, you are individually loved by the very universe, this thing we call God, in such a way that it's unwilling to leave you alone if you are still stuck. It wants you to be free. It wants you to experience, maybe for selfish reasons, because it only gets to experience itself through you. Get out there, it says. Live your life. I want to see what we can do together. It takes a lot of faith and a lot of trust. But I think Pradhan's onto something. If we're willing on a daily basis to practice blessing our life, blessing the situations we find ourselves, blessing the other people in our lives, that we're opening ourselves to claim that potential. So keep practicing. We have a couple of more weeks to go. And with that, I'm going to invite you to begin to prepare your offerings as we invite Denise back up.